7:02.
The Big Interview
With Bongani Bingwa.
19 after 7. Let me paint you a scenario. Say you had a promising career and then COVID hit and you lost your cushy income and all its benefits. For the last few years, you've been solely reliant on your spouse for support, but you're married out of community of property without accrual. If they died or decided to divorce you, you would be left with nothing. For many years of your non-financial contributions to the marriage would not count. You signed the prenup deal. You deal. Well, maybe not. A groundbreaking new bill is on the table, the General Laws Family Matters Amendment Bill, and it could allow courts to override antenuptial contracts to ensure a fairer split of assets after divorce or death. For couples married out of community of property without accrual, it could be life-changing. Minister Mamoloko Kubai says it's about justice and closing gaps that have long left women in particular out in the cold. They're also thinking about the formal recognition of Muslim and customary marriages, which will be huge steps in modernizing our family law. So whether you're married, about to tie the knot, or just love a good legal shake-up, this one might be for you. Let's start with Alison Botha, who is, of course, the State Law Advisor in Legislative Development and Implementation Unit at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Alison, thank you so much for your time. What motivated the department to bring this bill forward, and how urgent is this implementation?
Good morning, Bongani, and good morning to you and your listeners, and thank you so much for this platform and this opportunity to talk about the General Family Laws Amendment Bill. For context, the bill arises out of two judgments which the Constitutional Court handed down in 2023. The first is, and the earliest, is the Centre for Child Law versus TS and Others case, which was handed down in 2023, and then later came EB versus ER and KG versus Minister of Home Affairs and Others. In terms of the orders of the Constitutional Court, both of these cases allowed for 24 months for Parliament to bring about these changes in the legislation. And the changes in the legislation are to the Divorce Act, the Matrimonial Property Act, and the Mediation in Certain Divorce Matters Act. And because of that 24-month period, which will expire this year, the changes are urgent and will be immediate.
All right.
And immediately introduced.
Alison, I'm going to get you to get to the nub of it in layman's speak, if you will. What do they actually mean? What's being proposed? What's going to change?
So the Divorce Act is going to change, and so will the MPA change. And the purpose of those amendments is to expand the ambit or the application of the redistribution remedy. The redistribution remedy allows for the court to exercise discretion and award certain assets of one of the spouses to the other spouse on application. And that discretion can be exercised in terms of what's set out in the Divorce Act. And the Divorce Act provides that the court can distribute this in terms of Section 7, subsection 4, if the court is satisfied that it's just and equitable, if that spouse contributed directly or indirectly to the maintenance or increase of the estate of the other party during the subsistence of the marriage, either by rendering services or saving expenses which would otherwise have been incurred or in any other manner.
Does that mean it not so much nullifies, but it limits what you can or can't do with your spouse upon either the dissolution of the marriage or death, and you can't hide behind an antenuptial contract?
So what it does is that it creates a remedy where a remedy didn't exist before for certain categories of marriages. This remedy existed for marriages which were entered into before the Matrimonial Property Act. So before antenuptial contracts existed.
This was 1984, right?
Yes, this is 1984. So now what it does is it applies to marriages post-84. So now marriages which may be out of community or property without accrual, and also those marriages which are dissolved by death. So it expands the application of an existing remedy.
Right.
Not so much nullifies it, but rather expands it for the purposes of equality.
What will it mean for customary marriages and Muslim marriages?
So customary marriages and Muslim marriages are dealt with in terms of both the Divorce Act and the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. And what this does, and what currently exists, is that this remedy already applies to customary marriages which were entered into before 84. It will now apply to those entered into after 84, and it will also apply to those dissolved by death. And the same with the Muslim marriages.
All right. Alison Botha is a state law advisor at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development.
702.
The Big Interview.
With Bongani Bingwa.
Listening to that, of course, is family law attorney Ceri von Ludwig, who joins us now. You've heard what Alison had to say. And just perhaps more broadly, Ceri, from your experience, how significant are these proposed amendments, and how have current antenuptial contracts disadvantaged non-earning spouses? And I would imagine that's usually women.
Morning, Bongani. Yes, I've been dying to chip in here, I must say, because it's quite close to my heart, you can imagine. My initial stance when I heard about this was to say, hold on a minute, when somebody has actually gone to the trouble and the time and the expense of concluding an antenuptial contract, then why does the court think that it should have any business going in there and meddling? And I say meddling in the most respectful way. I've also been serving as an acting judge in court, so I know that judges work very hard and we don't meddle. But it's probably a good way of putting it. In other words, before you got married, you applied your mind. You went along, you consulted with an attorney, you decided how you wanted to get married, which was out of community of property with no accrual. And suddenly down the line, at the end of your marriage, the spouse who comes off worst is saying, hang on a minute, I'm changing my mind, that doesn't suit me after all. I now want a share of your assets.
Ceri,
the other spouse is saying, but we had a contract.
Hold on. Far be it from me to argue with one like you, but isn't part of the thinking here that we might have a different power dynamic at the start of that marriage, and so I may perhaps, without even admitting it, unwillingly sign this prenup arrangement just to get married in the hope that the other spouse may look after me, and when that changes and I've contributed significantly to perhaps their career trajectory and what they earn, etc., now the tables have been turned, I can have a little bit of a voice. Doesn't it protect people who find themselves in that scenario?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head and taken the words out of my mouth and all those good things. You're a lawmaker. You understand what it's all about. The thing that I didn't understand from my privileged position is that many, and I didn't understand this as a strong woman, many, particularly women, but it's absolutely true that people of all genders and persuasions marry and conclude antenuptial contracts. Those people are disempowered. We don't generally tend to think that when you're entering into a contract, you come to that contractual table less strong. But when the research was done, it was indeed found that particularly women, and particularly still in today's society, and particularly where we are the child bearers and we do tend to stay at home, and there is still a little bit of the artificial perception of marriage being the place where you will have children and your spouse will look after you, then yes, absolutely, many people come to that antenuptial contract without an equality of contractual power. And that is exactly, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. But that's what takes us to the important thing, is that this relief isn't just there for the taking. Alison mentioned the discretion of the court which is a very, very important thing. And she also mentioned some sections of the Divorce Act where the court is directed what it must look at. So you can't just go along to anybody and say, right, I've changed my mind, I want a share, but I'm married out of community of property with an antenuptial contract after 1984. It's a matter of actually applying to the court for a redistribution of the assets of the wealthier spouse to the poorer spouse. So it really isn't there for taking. It's a big thing.
One might ask the question, why should I get married at all, Ceri, hey?
Well, let's not go into that unless I can have the entire day on the radio.
Family law attorney Ceri von Ludwig there. So I think these are things for people to consider around your marital arrangements and choices. And ultimately, why can't we just be nice to each other?
Current events, developing stories,
Tough questions.
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.